I'm 37 now. On paper, I have the kind of life most people would call comfortable. I run my own business. I own a small house in a quiet neighborhood, and I've reached a point where I don't really worry about bills anymore. I'm not insanely rich or anything like that, but I'm stable, independent, and finally at peace. But the thing about peace is, it's a fragile thing. You only know how valuable it is when you've lived most of your life in chaos. My chaos came in the form of two people most of the world would describe as dutiful parents. At least, that's the image they like to project. My parents had this way of making sure everyone outside the house saw them as hardworking, self-sacrificing, and endlessly patient. They were the type to say things like, "We give everything for our son," with this tone of martyrdom. People would nod, smile, and call them saints. Inside the house, though, the language was different. Inside, it was all about the debt. I don't remember the first time I heard it, but I can't remember a version of my childhood where it wasn't already there. The constant reminder that everything I had was owed. Food on the table? That wasn't love, it was a line in the ledger. Shoes for school? That wasn't care, it was another tally. Even being allowed to live in their house was framed as some grand generosity, as though I were a squatter they tolerated. I'll give you an example. I was maybe 8 years old. My sneakers had holes in them. We weren't poor, but my dad always made sure I felt like I was an expense they begrudgingly endured. I asked if I could get new shoes, because other kids were laughing at mine. His response, "You think money grows on trees? You want new shoes? That's $50. Add that to your tab. One day you're going to have to pay me back for all this. You better remember that." He said it with this half smile, like it was a joke, but it never felt like a joke. My mom would usually chime in with her version. "We don't get thanks, we don't get respect, but we keep giving. You're lucky we don't charge you rent for that roof over your head." Imagine being a kid and hearing that almost daily. Imagine internalizing the idea that you weren't loved, you were tolerated, that every hug came with invisible dollar signs attached. Every meal had strings woven into it. The language shaped everything. Report card comes home. Instead of "We're proud of you," it was, "Good. Keep those grades up. Maybe you'll make enough money to pay us back faster." Birthday? No matter the gift, the wrapping, the cake, it ended with, "Don't forget, this all goes on your bill." By the time I was a teenager, I started keeping a notebook. At first, it was just me trying to make sense of it. I'd write down the things they said I owed, as if someday I'd need proof. Groceries, clothes, even gas for rides to school, they attached a price tag to everything. Some nights I'd stare at that list, my chest tight, feeling like I was born into a contract I never signed. The funny part is, they didn't even need the money. We weren't struggling. My dad had a steady job, my mom worked part-time, and they weren't living hand-to-mouth. It wasn't about financial need. It was about control. They wanted me to grow up believing that I was in eternal debt to them, that I would never escape the balance sheet they kept in their heads. And it worked, at least for a while. I grew up crushed by guilt. I felt like a burden even when I did nothing wrong. I walked on eggshells because any mistake, spilling juice, getting a B on a test, breaking a toy, would lead to another lecture about how expensive I was. One night stands out to me more than most. I was maybe 12. We'd had spaghetti for dinner, and I dropped my fork on the carpet. Sauce splattered. My dad's face turned red instantly. "Do you know how much carpet cleaning costs? That's another $100. Write it down in your little brain ledger. You're drowning in debt, boy." My mom sighed, shook her head, and muttered, "We sacrificed everything for him, and this is how he repays us." I remember cleaning up that stain with tears in my eyes, not because of the mess, but because I already felt like a failed investment. Here's the thing. They never once told me I was loved. Not in a real way. Not without it being transactional. Their version of love was always packaged in guilt. "We love you. That's why we give you all this. Don't forget what you owe." And so I didn't forget. I grew up with their words tattooed on my brain. "You are in debt. You are a burden. You will never be free until you pay." That belief followed me everywhere. Through school, through my first jobs, even into early adulthood. It shaped how I saw myself, how I approached relationships, how I carried shame like a second skin. But it also did something else. It planted a seed. A stubborn little seed that whispered, "One day, you'll pay it off. One day, you'll close the account." At the time, I didn't know what that would look like. But the thought of balance, of debt repaid, of freedom, was enough to keep me going when everything else felt unbearable. By the time I hit high school, the debt wasn't just a threat, it was a curriculum. My parents taught it like a class, daily repetition until the facts stuck. At 14, my homeroom sent home a permission slip for a 2-day music trip. I played trumpet. The fee was $85, plus money for food. I remember handing the paper to my mom, heart doing that trap bird thing in my chest. She skimmed it and set it down. $85 for you to ride around on a bus and blow air through a pipe? Put it on your tab. My dad didn't look up from the TV. And your meals. Don't forget meals. We're not subsidizing your vacations. I didn't go. I told my band director I was busy that weekend. And then I sat on my bed while the bus left without me and did the math on the back of the permission slip. $85 saved, $85 I didn't owe. And somehow that didn't feel like a win. At 15, I got a job bagging groceries. My first paycheck was $142. 11. I stood at the kitchen table with that check like it was a medal. My dad took it from my hand, squinted at it, and nodded. Good. You're contributing. Board is 50%. Board? Food, water, electricity, gas to take you places. You eat, you cost. 50%, non-negotiable. And that's generous. If we charged interest, you'd never crawl out. I was a kid, 15, and the words board and interest slid into me like cold metal. I opened a student account at the local credit union 2 weeks later and asked them in a whisper if it could be just me on it. The teller looked at my scabbed knuckles and the way I wouldn't make eye contact and said yes without asking more questions. I hid the debit card inside the spine of an old math textbook because math was the one thing they didn't touch. Where's your paycheck? My mom asked next time. I deposited it, I said. Hand me half in cash, my dad said. Don't make me stand over you at the ATM. So I did. I pulled 20 after 20 and set them on the table. He counted out 7 of them, then took a 5 and 2 ones for utilities and slid the rest back. See? He said, like a banker explaining a favor. We're reasonable. It wasn't about being reasonable. It was about keeping the meter running. It was about making sure every burger I ate at my shift break tasted like guilt. I kept a notebook anyway, not the angry scrawl from part 1. This was neat columns and dates, rounded figures, a running total. School clothes, $120, estimate. Back to school supplies, $35. Sports physical, $30. Copay when I sprained my wrist, $20. Shampoo, toothpaste, school lunches, the time they replaced my backpack because a zipper broke, everything had a number. It made me feel less like I was drowning if I could name the depth. There were fights that were small cuts and fights that were knife wounds. A small cut, me asking to stay late after school for science club, my mom saying, so more electricity for lights in this house while you're not here, and what do we get for that? A knife wound. When I was 16 and bought a used laptop with my saved tips from the store cafe, $200 in 1s and 5s, spread across 6 months. I brought it home like a relic. My dad turned it in his hands. Nice. Under this roof, it's mine. No, I said. That was new, no. It tasted like metal. I bought it. With our electricity powering it. With our internet. On our table. We're letting you use it, because we're good people. He said, good people the same way he said sucker. I memorized that. I used that laptop to do homework in the public library when they closed the family Wi-Fi at 10. Yes, they actually changed the password at night. So you sleep, my mom said. And so you don't run up our bill, my dad added. The librarian, a woman with bright scarves and gentle eyes named Ms. Ortega, noticed how often I was there. One evening, she pulled a pamphlet from a drawer and slid it to me. FAFSA, she said. Financial aid. You're a junior, right? Start thinking now. I don't think my parents will help, I said, reflex. She tilted her head. Sometimes you have to help yourself. There are ways. I stopped myself from crying because I wanted to apply for aid, not flood the keyboard. I read the booklet cover to cover that night in the library's hum, copying down acronyms like they were spells. Pell, YEFC, dependency override. I didn't know then how difficult those overrides could be. I just knew the phrase independent student sounded like oxygen. At home, independence was a violation. A week later, I came home to find my notebook open on the coffee table. The ledger notebook. My mom had found it under my mattress. She tapped the page with a red nail. Keeping accounts, accountant? Make sure you write down the cost of the roof you sleep under while you write that. My dad grinned. How much do you have saved? Don't lie. Not much, I said, which was half true. Most of it was in a coffee can hidden under a loose vent cover in my closet. The rest was in that credit union account. He leaned back. Good. Because if you walk out of here before paying us back, that's theft. You hear me? Thief. The word landed like a brand. I folded the notebook shut and carried it to my room like I was escorting a relative to their grave. I didn't stop working. If anything, I worked more. Saturdays, I stocked at the hardware store for cash. Sundays, I mowed lawns. After school, I tutored algebra at $5 an hour. I learned how to always ask to be paid in cash and how to tuck a folded tin into the sock lining so it didn't jingle. I learned to eat dinner before I got home so I could pass on the food in the fridge without triggering a ledger lecture. Not hungry, I'd say, and my mom would mutter about another mouth to feed who thinks he's too good for what we offer. The ledger grew. I started adding things I paid for myself, too. Socks, razors, the $12 pack of printer paper that my dad still yelled about using. That ink costs money, as if printing a resume drained a bank account. I wasn't sure why I did that at the time, record my own outlays. Later, it would matter. There were soft moments, if you could call them that. My mom would kiss my cheek on a Sunday morning and say, "We love you," as she handed me a list of chores with dollar amounts scrawled next to each. $10 deducted if I did the lawn. $20 deducted if I cleaned the gutters. My dad would pat my shoulder after a shift and say, "You keep this up, you'll be square by 30. Sometimes I wanted to believe them. Most times I didn't. My 17th birthday was a cake with candles and a card that said, in my dad's handwriting, "Happy birthday, big spender," with a smiley face that felt like a wound. The candle smoke curled into the kitchen's yellow light, and I made a wish I didn't say out loud. Leave. The plan grew bones. I got a P.O. box, paid for with lawn money, so I could put a safe address on applications. I opened a second bank account at a different credit union because the first branch was too close to home. I asked the grocery store manager for more hours and took the graveyard shift 3 nights a week, stocking freezers until my fingers went numb. I slept in the library between classes and told my teachers I was bad at mornings when they asked why I looked sick. I learned the hidden map of my own house, where the floorboards squeaked, how to set a backpack down so it made no sound, which drawer in my dad's desk held receipts for household expenses, and how to photograph them with my phone without leaving fingerprints. I started collecting numbers like a magpie. Electric bills, gas, the cost of my pediatrician copay. It felt like treason and salvation at the same time. College is expensive, my mom said, shaking her head over a neighbor's kid who'd gone away. We told you, don't expect handouts. I won't, I said. And I meant it, from a place that was beginning to feel like steel. Senior year, the school counselor called me in. Different woman, Mrs. Henley this time, crisp blazer, warm eyes. Your grades are excellent, she said. Have you thought about staying local, starting at community college? It's affordable. You could transfer. My parents want me to work, I said. She studied me for a second, then slid a piece of paper across the desk. If you ever need a letter stating that you're financially independent, call. She scribbled her number. And if you need a food pantry referral, you didn't get it from me. I carried that paper in my wallet like a relic, behind the debit card in the math book. The fights got louder the closer I got to 18. You think you're grown? My dad snapped one night, after I came home late from a shift and dared to microwave leftovers at 11:30. Grown men pay their bills. I pay, I said, voice shaking. I give you half my check. He laughed. Half of a pittance. You eat more than that. Leave him, my mom muttered. Not to me, to the air, to a version of me that existed as a debt. He'll come crawling back when the world chews him up. 2 months before graduation, I found a room for rent above a mechanic's shop, 10 minutes from the community college. The ad said cash only, month to month, no questions asked, and when I met the landlord, a guy named Jay with oil under his nails and teardrop tattoos he didn't talk about, he shrugged and said, "Don't bring cops, don't bring bedbugs, we're fine." How much? I asked, heart in my throat. $450. First month and deposit. I'd been saving for 2 years. I had $600 in the coffee can, $300 in the account, and another $200 in rolled quarters and a Pringles can under my bed. I said, "Okay," and Jay handed me a key. I walked home with that key in my shoe, under the insole, like a talisman. I circled a date on the calendar in my room and wrote one word on it: out. When I came down to dinner that night, my dad was in a weirdly good mood. "I've got a surprise," he said. "Good news. Your uncle needs help at his auto shop. Full-time. You can start next week. We'll put your check straight toward your debt. You'll thank me later." I looked at the calendar date burning holes in my skull, at the key pressing into the bone of my foot, and said, "No." The room went very quiet. The fridge hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. "No," my dad repeated, like it was a slur. "I got into the community college," I said. "I'm taking classes. I'll keep working at the store." "We're not paying for that." "I didn't ask you to." He stared at me a long time, the way you look at a misbehaving appliance, calculating whether to repair or toss. Finally, he shook his head. "You think you can make it without us? Fine. But if you walk out of here owing us, you are dead to us." The words were supposed to scare me. They did. But they also did something else. They drew a clean line. I went back to my room and copied another number into the ledger. First month's rent plus deposit equals $900. On a new page, I wrote, "Debt, as they define it." Next page, "Debt, as I define it." I didn't know then that one day I would settle theirs to the cent. I just knew that my definition included something they never accounted for: freedom. I put the notebook in my backpack, tucked the key back under my insole, and kept moving. 2 months. Then 1. Then 3 weeks. The closer it got, the easier it became to say no to their tally sheet love. The meter in their heads kept clicking. The meter in mine started to slow. I didn't sleep much. I counted days, dollars, and exits. I learned the weight of a packed bag and what it means to walk softly in your own house. On my last Sunday at home, I mowed the lawn without being asked, crossed $10 deducted off the old chore list in my head, and thought, this is the last time I mow this grass for free. I circled the date again that night. Harder, the pen biting through paper. The ink bled. I didn't. Graduation day should have felt like a celebration. Kids in caps and gowns throwing their hats, hugging their parents, talking about dorms and scholarships. For me, it felt like a countdown timer had just gone off. Everyone else was starting something. I was ending something. My parents showed up to the ceremony, of course. They wore their best proud parents' masks, smiling for the neighbors, shaking hands with teachers. My dad even told my principal, we worked hard to raise him. We expect him to pay us back by being successful. It got a polite laugh from the adults in earshot, but I saw the flicker in Mrs. Henley's eyes. She knew. After the ceremony, my mom hugged me just tight enough to whisper, "Enjoy the party. Tomorrow you start your real debt." Then she kissed my cheek for the cameras. That night, I lay in bed staring at the calendar. The date I'd circled months ago was 3 days away. The bag under my bed was already packed. Clothes, notebooks, the old laptop, the coffee can of savings, my ledger. I'd been rehearsing the exit in my head so long it almost felt like a movie I'd watched too many times. Still, when it came, it didn't feel cinematic. It felt like survival. I left at 5 a.m. while the house was dead quiet. The birds were just starting up, the light was gray, and the air smelled like wet grass. I slipped out with my backpack and duffel, shoes laced, key to the mechanic's room pressed hard into my palm. The moment I closed the door behind me, the silence hit different. It wasn't the hush of walking on eggshells. It was wide open. I didn't look back. Jay, the landlord, barely blinked when I showed up at the shop with my bags. He pointed upstairs with his coffee mug and said, "Room's yours. Rent's due on the 1st. Then he went back to his carburetor like I hadn't just walked out of 17 years of captivity. The room was small, cracked linoleum, one window facing an alley, a mattress on the floor. To me, it looked like a palace. I set my bags down and just sat there, breathing, until my chest stopped buzzing. That first week was a blur. Work, classes, exhaustion. The grocery store let me keep my evening shifts. I biked to campus during the day, worked until close, then rode back to the mechanics with my legs burning. The mattress felt like heaven no matter how thin it was. I ate dollar ramen and peanut butter sandwiches and thought, I'm free, I'm free, I'm free. Of course, my parents didn't let it go. Day 2 in the new place, I got the first voicemail. "Dad, so that's it? You sneak out in the middle of the night? After everything we've given you? You walk out owing us thousands of dollars. You think you can just erase that?" Day 3, a text from my mom. "Ungrateful. After the clothes I washed for you, the meals I cooked, the rides I gave, all of it wasted. I didn't reply. By week 2, the calls came daily. Thief. User. Dead to us. My dad even drove to the grocery store once and tried to corner me at the time clock. He hissed, "You'll pay us back one way or another." My manager, a guy named Ron with a belly like a barrel, stepped between us and said, "If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops." Dad left, but not before pointing at me and mouthing, "You owe." It rattled me, but it didn't break me. If anything, it pushed me harder. I doubled down on classes, doubled shifts when coworkers called out, took odd jobs fixing bikes and tutoring. Every dollar I earned went into 2 piles: survival and escape velocity. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it was oxygen. Sitting in those classrooms, nobody knew me as a debtor. Nobody looked at me like a bill. Professors asked for essays, not repayments. Classmates asked to borrow pencils, not my soul. Still, the old wiring ran deep. If a friend spotted me lunch, I panicked inside. If a professor praised me, my brain whispered, "Now you owe them." It took years before I could hear a kind word without bracing for an invoice. But slowly, things shifted. Semester by semester, I chipped away. Pell Grants, scholarships, work-study, every acronym from that FAFSA booklet became another rung on the ladder. Ms. Ortega from the library even wrote me a recommendation letter. I cried when I read it. Not because it said anything miraculous, but because it asked nothing in return. At 20, I transferred to a state university. Bigger classes, bigger campus, bigger possibilities. I picked up a major in finance because numbers felt like armor. No guilt, no manipulation, just math. Math I could trust. My parents still hovered, though. Emails, blocked numbers, messages through relatives. We're waiting. You think you're free, but debt follows you. You can't run from family. Sometimes I almost cracked. I'd picture them sitting at their kitchen table, grumbling about their investment gone bad, and I'd feel this molten guilt in my stomach. But then I'd open my ledger. The notebook had grown ragged, pages curled and smudged, but it was mine. Line after line, tally after tally, a reminder. I wasn't running from debt. I was running toward freedom, and I swore to myself, one day, I'd pay them. Not a penny more, not a penny less. I'd close the account. Forever. That thought carried me through my 20s. After graduation, I landed a junior analyst role at a firm downtown. Not glamorous, not huge money, but steady. I wore cheap suits from Goodwill, rode the bus, and ate canned beans for lunch. Every raise, every bonus, every extra dollar, I stacked it. The ledger wasn't just a book anymore. It was a mission. Meanwhile, my parents' messages grew bitter. By then, they weren't even pretending. Other kids helped their parents retire. What have you done for us? You're selfish. We should have charged you interest. You think a degree erases what you owe? I stopped reading them after a while. But I didn't delete them either. They became evidence. Proof that what I was doing wasn't crazy. It was exactly what they'd asked for. By 30, I had climbed a few rungs. Better title, better pay, a small apartment with real furniture. I could finally breathe without checking my bank app every hour. And that's when I started the real project, calculating the debt. It started with my old notebook. The numbers I'd scribbled as a kid, shoes, groceries, gas money, were crude, but they were a map. I cross-referenced them with old cost of living charts, USDA food cost reports, housing expense calculators. I pulled average annual figures for child-rearing costs in the 90s, adjusted for inflation. I went line by line. Rent share, utilities, food, clothing, healthcare, school supplies, even birthday presents. I documented everything. Every cent they ever claimed I owed, I tried to quantify. It took months. I worked on it nights, weekends, sometimes until 2 a.m. My spreadsheets grew tabs like weeds. At one point, I had so many versions of childhood cost v final, XLSX, that my computer froze. But eventually, I had a number. A clean, precise figure. The exact amount it might have cost to raise me, as they defined it. And when I looked at that number, I didn't feel crushed. I felt powerful. Because I knew, one day soon, I'd be able to pay it. Not out of guilt. Not out of love. Out of spite. Out of closure. The day I closed that ledger for the last time, I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I was ahead. By the time I turned 31, I had what my younger self would have called a miracle: stability. I had a career, a salary that covered more than just ramen and bills, and a one-bedroom condo with a balcony. I had my own coffee maker, a bed that wasn't a mattress on the floor, and even a couch I didn't pull off the sidewalk. But more than any of that, I had a folder on my computer labeled Repayment Plan. It was disguised, buried 3 directories deep inside work spreadsheets, but I knew where it was. That folder was the culmination of decades of mental math, notebook scribbles, and late-night research. When my coworkers went out for drinks, I went home and opened the file. When friends asked about hobbies, I said reading, instead of admitting that my real pastime was itemizing every cost of my existence from birth to 18. It wasn't obsession for obsession's sake. It was purpose. Every time I tallied up another line, 1996 sneakers, EST $49.99, I felt stronger. Like I was building the weapon that would finally cut the last thread between me and them. Let me explain the math, because that's the heart of it. Step 1. I digitized my old ledger. Every messy teenage scribble, every estimate, went into a spreadsheet. Step 2. I filled the gaps. For categories I hadn't tracked, I pulled average government data. USDA food plans, Department of Agriculture reports, Bureau of Labor Statistics data. There are entire studies on the cost of raising a child in America by decade. I devoured them. Step 3. I adjusted for inflation. Every dollar in 1995 wasn't worth the same in 2020, and I wanted precision. If I was going to do this, it had to be exact. No rounding, no approximations. Step 4. I added interest, not as a punishment, but because they'd always said if we charged you interest, you'd never crawl out. So I charged myself interest. I made the debt real by their standards. After months of late nights, what I had was a number, 6 figures, down to the cents. The supposed cost of me. When I saw that final total on the screen, I didn't feel despair. I felt calm. Because by then, for the first time in my life, I had the money to cover it. You might think I'd want to spend that money on myself, vacations, a nicer car, some luxury. And I did enjoy some of that. But the bulk of my savings became the debt repayment fund. I kept it in a separate account, watching the balance grow until it matched the number in my spreadsheet. Every raise, every bonus, every smart investment I made, I funneled a slice into that fund. I treated it like a mortgage I was determined to pay off early. The difference was, when this one was paid, I wouldn't just own a house. I'd own myself. Meanwhile, my parents hadn't stopped trying. They'd mellowed slightly in tone, but only because they thought time had softened me. I'd get emails like, "We're still waiting for you to do the right thing. Family doesn't turn its back. You'll regret this someday. We don't ask for much, just acknowledgement of what you owe." Sometimes, they'd try the guilt angle. "Your cousins help their parents. They send money home. What have you done for us?" Or the fake nostalgia. "Remember the Christmas we bought you that bike? That was love. We just want you to show it back." I didn't reply. Not once. Silence became my native tongue. But every email, every voicemail, every snide message through extended family, it all fed the fire. It reminded me that this wasn't paranoia. This wasn't exaggeration. This was exactly who they'd always been. So I kept saving. I kept planning. And then one day, I was ready. The fund hit the exact number when I was 36. Down to the cent. I stared at the account screen for a long time, the balance glowing like a finish line. My heart didn't race. It didn't hurt. It just steadied. This was it. I spent a week preparing. First, I drafted the transfer note. Simple, clean, impossible to misinterpret. I typed it, deleted it, retyped it. Finally, I settled on 3 words: debt repaid. Second, I confirmed their bank info. They'd emailed it years earlier when trying to guilt me into sending something, anything. I'd ignored it then, but I'd saved it. I called their bank anonymously to confirm the account was still active. It was. Third, I rehearsed the aftermath. I blocked their numbers, emails, and social media accounts in advance. I set up filters so even if they tried new addresses, their words would vanish into spam. I told 2 close friends what I was about to do, not for approval, but so someone else knew. So the act wouldn't exist only in my head. Finally, on a quiet Sunday morning, I logged into my bank. My apartment was still, sun streaming through the blinds. I made coffee, sat at the desk, and pulled up the transfer screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. 17 years of ledger entries flashed through my mind. Every "you owe us," every dollar sign attached to a hug, every lecture about rent for the roof over my head. And then I typed the number, the exact figure, attached the note, clicked send. There it was. The ledger balanced. I closed my laptop, picked up my mug, and stepped onto the balcony. The city buzzed below, but I'd never felt quieter inside. You'd think revenge would feel hot, explosive, dramatic, but it didn't. It felt like silence after a fire alarm, like a weight unclipping from my shoulders. Because in that moment, I wasn't their investment anymore. I wasn't their debtor. I wasn't their captive accountant. I was just me, and they had exactly what they always said they wanted. Not love, not family, not connection, money, and nothing else. The transfer cleared the next day. My bank app confirmed it with a green checkmark. Funds successfully sent. 6 figures, gone from my account in an instant. I'd been waiting for that moment for years, but when it came, I didn't feel panic about the loss. I felt light, like I'd finally set down a suitcase I hadn't realized I'd been dragging my whole life. But of course, the silence didn't last. By Tuesday morning, the first call came in. I didn't answer. I'd already blocked their numbers. Instead, they left a voicemail from my dad's cell. The transcript popped up automatically. What the hell is this? Are you kidding me? You think this settles anything? You think you can buy us off with some number you cooked up? Call me back. Now. I didn't. An hour later, another voicemail. My mom this time. So that's it. That's how you treat your parents? After everything? A bank transfer and a slap in the face? You're disgusting. You can't put a price on what we did for you. That one almost made me laugh. Couldn't put a price on it? They'd been doing exactly that my entire childhood. By evening, there were a dozen missed calls. New numbers I didn't recognize. They'd started using relatives' phones. I blocked each one. By Wednesday, the emails came. Subject line, what kind of son does this? Another, we raised you better than this. Another, debt repaid? You arrogant little. The body of the emails were all variations on the same theme: rage, disbelief, guilt tripping. You'll regret this. You'll die alone. You're cold, heartless, ungrateful. I didn't reply. I never would. Because here's the thing, I wasn't interested in their reaction. The revenge wasn't about making them feel anything. It was about closing the ledger for me. Their anger, their sputtering outrage, that was just noise. For the first time in my life, their words couldn't touch me. Friends asked me later if I was tempted to write a long explanation, to send a letter saying, here's the exact math, here's what you did to me, here's why I'm gone. But no, that was the beauty of it. The note, debt repaid, said everything. Anything longer would have given them more to argue with, more strings to pull. This way, there was nothing to debate. Just a final balance sheet with zeros across the board. I blocked their emails the same way I'd blocked their numbers. One click, gone. The stream of venom dried up overnight. For a while, I braced for escalation, showing up at my job, sending letters to my condo, dragging extended family into it. But it never came. I think, in their own warped way, they got the message. I'd paid them. I'd settled the account. There was nothing left to hold over me. And if I was dead to them, well, I'd been dead to them long before. The strangest part wasn't the lack of contact. It was the quiet in my own head. For 30+ years, I'd carried their voices everywhere I went. Eating at a restaurant? I'd hear, do you know how much that costs? Buying new clothes? Add that to your tab. Even when I succeeded at something, the voice would pipe up. Better make it worth what we spend on you. But after the transfer, the voices went silent. The first weekend after, I walked into a bookstore. I picked up a hardcover without checking the price, carried it to the register, and paid. And for the first time in my life, I didn't hear the imaginary tally. No phantom ledger in the back of my skull. Just me, choosing a book I wanted. It felt absurdly profound. A 10-minute errand that would have once been loaded with guilt became pure. Clean. Mine. That's when I knew the revenge had worked. Not because they were angry. Not because I'd won. But because I'd finally cut the cord in my own brain. A month later, a cousin messaged me on Facebook. Hey, your folks are telling everyone you paid them off and cut contact. They're furious. What happened? I stared at the message for a long time. My cousin was one of the few decent ones in the extended family, and I thought about explaining. But then I realized I didn't need to. So I typed back. They wanted repayment. I gave it. That's all there is. And that was enough. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. I still had bad days, still wrestled with old habits of guilt and people-pleasing. Trauma doesn't disappear with a wire transfer. But the difference was, now the guilt didn't have a face. It didn't have their name stamped on it. It was just residue, something I could clean up over time. I went to therapy for the first time. I started traveling. I even let myself buy a decent car, something safe and reliable that didn't smell like fast food grease. Every step forward felt lighter, unburdened. Like I was finally living on my own terms, not as some line item on an endless bill. The last time I thought about my parents with real intensity was on my 37th birthday. I sat on my balcony again, coffee in hand, the same place I'd been when I hit send on the transfer. The city lights stretched out below me, the air warm. I thought about the ledger, about all the years of feeling like a debt, about every slammed door, every guilt trip, every reminder that I owed for the privilege of existing. And I thought about how, in the end, I'd given them exactly what they wanted. Not love, not closeness, not a son, money, and nothing more. That was the revenge. Not screaming, not exposing them, not burning bridges. Just giving them precisely what they demanded, and then walking away forever. The silence since has been the sweetest sound I've ever known. When people talk about cutting contact with family, they usually picture some explosive blowout, shouting, slammed doors, a dramatic exit. Mine wasn't like that. Mine was quieter, cleaner, like snipping a thread with scissors. But the truth is, when the thread's been tied around your neck for decades, even after it's cut, you still feel the phantom pressure. That's what the first year after debt repaid was like. A ghost rope. I'd be sitting in a cafe, sipping a latte I'd paid for with my own card, and I'd suddenly hear my dad's voice in my head. $4 for hot milk? Add it to your tab. I'd be at the grocery store, buying salmon instead of instant noodles, and I'd hear my mom's mutter, ungrateful. Thinks he's too good for what we gave him. For so long, those voices had been the background music of my life. Cutting contact didn't erase them overnight. That's when I realized I'd settled the financial debt, but I still had an emotional one I'd never agreed to, but had been paying interest on for years. So I did something my younger self never would have imagined. I went to therapy. The first session, I sat across from a woman named Dr. Patel and told her I'd recently gone no contact with my parents. She nodded like she'd heard it 1,000 times. They used to tell me I owed them for existing, I said. Like, literally, they'd keep a running tally. She didn't look shocked, just asked, how did that make you feel? And for a second, I wanted to laugh. It felt absurdly obvious. But then I heard myself say, like a criminal in my own house. And suddenly, my chest cracked open. I spent 45 minutes spilling stories I hadn't told anyone. The spaghetti stain, the notebook, the way they changed the Wi-Fi password at night. When the session ended, she said something simple. You know love isn't transactional, right? And I said, yeah, out loud. But in my gut, it felt brand new. Therapy became my new ledger, but one that worked in reverse. Instead of recording debts, I started recording freedoms. First session, told someone the truth without flinching. Third session, went to the grocery store and bought what I wanted without guilt. 10th session, stopped bracing for my phone to vibrate with their names. It was slow, uneven, but over time, the phantom rope loosened. Meanwhile, life moved forward. My career kept climbing. By 37, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I had savings, investments, a circle of friends who saw me as a person, not a ledger. I traveled, saw oceans and mountains I'd only read about. One trip stands out, standing on a beach in Portugal, watching the sun drop into the Atlantic. I remember thinking, this moment costs nothing. This is mine. And for once, the thought wasn't defiant, it was peaceful. Of course, family gossip reached me now and then. Cousins, distant relatives, old neighbors would drop hints. Your parents still talk about you. They say you betrayed them. I'd just nod, smile, and change the subject. Because their story wasn't my story anymore. They could paint me as the ungrateful son all they wanted. It didn't matter. I'd given them what they asked for. The rest of my life was no longer theirs to define. One of the biggest shifts came when I stopped feeling guilty for being happy. That's something people don't talk about enough. When you grow up in a house where joy is taxed, success is treated like debt repayment, even small pleasures feel stolen. But little by little, I reclaimed them. A good meal, a lazy Sunday morning, a laugh that didn't need permission. The first time I bought myself a new watch, not flashy, just something sleek and solid. I felt that old guilt prick at me. Then I remembered. I'd already paid my way into freedom. This was mine, and the guilt didn't return. Sometimes, I wonder if they sit at their kitchen table and stare at that lump sum in their account. If they pick at it the way they once picked at me, circling the numbers like vultures. I picture my dad grumbling. It's not enough. My mom sighing, we deserved more. And then I imagine them realizing there's no more coming. That the account is closed, the line dead, the silence permanent. It doesn't make me feel vengeful anymore. It makes me feel calm. Because the real revenge wasn't the money. It was the absence. The absence of my voice on their phone. The absence of my name at their holidays. The absence of my guilt feeding their egos. That silence is priceless. The last entry I ever wrote in my old ledger wasn't a number. It was a sentence. Love is not a transaction. I stared at those words for a long time, then closed the notebook and put it away for good. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't recording what I owed. I was recording what I'd finally learned. It's strange, writing all of this out now at 37, looking back on the years when my life was ruled by numbers that were never really mine. I used to think my whole story would always be about debt, a balance I could never pay off, a burden I could never escape. But here I am, debt-free in every sense that matters. The revenge itself, the transfer, the note, the blocking, was over in seconds. But the ripple effect has lasted. The longer I live in the quiet, the more I realize how much space that noise used to take up in my head. I don't walk into rooms bracing for criticism anymore. I don't hear phantom voices when I buy groceries. I don't replay old fights on loop in the shower. Instead, I hear silence. And in that silence, I've learned how to actually listen to myself. For years, my parents' version of me was the debtor, the child who cost too much, the kid who owed them for his very existence. That narrative defined me, whether I wanted it to or not. Now, I get to write my own. In therapy, Dr. Patel once asked me, if love had been unconditional in your childhood, what would it have looked like? I sat with that for a while. Then I said, it would have looked like being allowed to exist without paying for it. That's the best way I can describe the life I'm building now. Existence without a price tag. Meals without guilt. Achievements without invoices. It's not about luxury or wealth, though I've been fortunate to build a good career. It's about ownership. Of my time, my choices, my story. That's what I bought with my revenge. Ownership of myself. I don't check their social media anymore. I don't ask cousins for updates. Sometimes, I forget they even exist until someone mentions parents in passing. When I do think of them, it's not with rage. It's not even with sorrow. It's with distance. Like remembering a country I once lived in but never want to visit again. They wanted repayment. They got it. End of contract. I owe them nothing more. Not my voice, not my time, not my love. And that absence, that nothingness, is more final than any screaming match could ever have been. On my 37th birthday, I did something symbolic. I dug out the old ledger, the notebook I started when I was a teenager, full of numbers scrawled in panic. I flipped through the pages, one by one, reliving all the shoes, the meals, the gas money I once thought I'd be chained to forever. Then I closed it, walked out onto my balcony, and dropped it into the trash chute. It wasn't a dramatic fire or ritual burning, just a quiet disposal. Paper to waste. Because that's all it ever was. Wasted ink. Wasted years of my life thinking I owed something that was never mine to owe. Watching the notebook vanish into the chute felt better than any cathartic movie ending. It was final, and it was ordinary. Just like life is supposed to be. Now, when I think about revenge, I don't think about anger or punishment. I think about precision. About giving them exactly what they demanded, no more, no less. And about the freedom that came from refusing to give them the one thing they really wanted, access to me. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't fire and fury. It's balance. It's zeroing out the ledger. It's silence. If you're reading this because you've been told you owe your parents, let me say this, you don't. Existing isn't a debt. Childhood isn't a loan. Love isn't a contract. You don't have to carry their ledger in your head forever. You can close the book. On your own terms. I did. And it's the best thing I've ever done. Because the truth is, the real freedom wasn't in paying them back. It was in finally walking away.